I must obey. Get out of bed now.
Why would you do this?
The Lord commanded me.
Amen.
Based on a true story, this narrative follows a religious zealot who believes he is divinely appointed as God's disciple. He kidnaps a woman and transports her to the mountains with the intention of making her his wife. On the 5th of June 2002, a rebellious teenager named Elizabeth Smart is asleep in her family's home in Salt Lake City. Her slumber is abruptly interrupted when Brian Mitchell holds a knife to her throat. He commands her to rise and retrieve her shoes from the closet, threatening harm if she does not comply. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's sister, Mary Catherine, hears the disturbance but feigns sleep, anxious for her own safety. Brian stealthily guides Elizabeth through the house, careful not to wake the other family members. They then make their way to the wooded area behind the residence. As they approach the road, a police car comes into view, prompting Brian to force Elizabeth to the ground. He claims that his actions are divinely inspired and warns her that if she attempts to signal the officer, he will kill her and return to harm her sister. Shortly thereafter, Elizabeth begs him to release her. She suggests that if he intends to kill her, he should do so near the road so that her body can be discovered. The teenager insists that if he frees her, she will convince her parents not to alert the authorities. However, Brian threatens that if she tries to escape or disobeys him, he will have his associates eliminate her entire family. Eventually, they arrive at a secluded campsite concealed among the trees, where Brian calls for his wife, Wanda Barzee, referring to her as Hepzibah. Wanda, addressing Brian by his biblical name, Emmanuel, emerges from the tent and gasps upon seeing the terrified teenager. She envelops Elizabeth in a tight embrace before ushering her into the tent. Inside, Wanda instructs Elizabeth to remove her pajamas, claiming that she must be purified for their celestial union. As the bewildered teenager weeps, Wanda drapes a white robe-like garment over her clothing and then removes her own pajamas. When Elizabeth declines to remove her undergarments at the woman's insistence, Wanda cautions her that she could summon Brian to forcibly remove them. Eventually, the woman exits the tent, allowing her husband to enter, dressed in a similar white garment. He begins to recite a ritual that suggests he intends to take the teenager as his second wife. As he starts to undress, Elizabeth comprehends the impending situation and begins to scream for assistance. The man forcefully pushes her to the ground and exploits her vulnerability. Outside the tent, Wanda kneels in prayer, whispering fervently. The following day, Elizabeth awakens to find a thin metal chain secured around her ankle. She retrieves a safety pin from her clothing, attempting to use it to free herself, but her efforts are in vain. Realizing that the safety pin is her only connection to home, she places it on her robe as a reminder of the love she has always known. Shortly thereafter, she leaves the tent and observes the couple engaged in prayer. Upon noticing her, they mock her tears with laughter. Brian addresses her as Shirjahub, claiming she is fortunate to have been chosen by the Lord for salvation from the world. After some reflection, Elizabeth recalls the man, remembering how her mother had given him money while he was begging on the street, and how their father had invited him into their home and offered him employment. With tears in her eyes, she questions why he would harm her after her parents had shown him kindness. The disturbed man explains that the Lord has commanded him to prepare for the second coming by gathering pure women from this sinful world to take as his wives. Brian insists that he has no option but to comply with this divine directive. Wanda interjects, stating that Elizabeth's presence signifies that the Lord has paved the way for additional wives. As he has chosen her as his second wife, he declares that the teenager is now the handmaiden of his first wife and is obligated to meet any of his physical needs. When Elizabeth asserts that they are not married, Brian counters by reminding her that they have consummated their union, claiming that no man will desire her now. The following morning, Brian awakens the teenager and immediately exploits her vulnerability. Later, Elizabeth expresses her wish for a middle name, as E1izabth is traditionally a male name. In response, the man presents her with a Bible, allowing her to select a name from the Old Testament. She chooses the name Esther, inspired by the biblical figure, as Elizabeth intends to emerge victorious in her situation. The next day, the resolute teenager understands that she must stay in her captor's favor to ensure her survival, believing that if they like her, it will be harder for them to harm her. To this end, she offers to assist Wanda in preparing their next meal. The older woman discloses that Brian forced her to relinquish custody of all her children on the day of their marriage. During the meal, Elizabeth hears her Uncle Dave calling for her. To silence her, Brian threatens her uncle's life, leaving Elizabeth with no option but to remain quiet. The next day, she spots a helicopter hovering above the treetops and seizes the chance to wave her arms and shout for help. Regrettably, her captor shoves her into the tent, where they lie in silence until the aircraft departs. A week into her captivity, Elizabeth clings to the hope that someone is searching for her. However, as days pass without any sign of rescue, she realizes that Brian and Wanda have effectively concealed themselves from the outside world. In the ensuing days, the monotony of abuse and relentless chores fills her time. Whenever she feels on the brink of madness, she recalls the joyful moments spent with her family. Her murmurs about these treasured memories irritate Brian, who commands her to forget her family. He mentions that he believed she was prepared to accompany him to fetch water from the stream, prompting Elizabeth to assert her longing for any form of freedom. To gain the man's favor, the teenager ceases her resistance whenever he seeks to assert control over her body. Before long, Wanda voices her discontent regarding their lack of intimacy since Elizabeth's arrival, suggesting that the man favors the newcomer due to her youth and attractiveness. In an effort to soothe his envious wife, the man promises to be with Wanda in the morning and Elizabeth at night. Eventually, Brian frees the teenager from her chains using the key he wears around his neck. This brings joy to the captive, as water has been in short supply. They make their way to the stream, where the man instructs her to fill the empty jugs. Deliberately, she steps in the muddy ground to leave footprints for any potential search parties. Later, while Brian is away preaching in nearby towns, Elizabeth inquires with Wanda about his activities during his absence. Wanda explains that her husband takes what they need from stores under the guise of divine necessity. When Elizabeth points out that this amounts to shoplifting, Wanda is offended by her remark. After some reflection, Elizabeth asks what they should do if Brian is arrested, given that he possesses the key to her chains. Rather than addressing her concern, Wanda begins to sing and retreats into the tent. Seizing the moment, the prisoner attempts to unlock her chains with a safety pin. Suddenly, she hears the man approaching and quickly conceals the pin in the dirt. Brian presents her with a missing person flyer featuring her image, explaining that it has been posted throughout the city. Before allowing her to eat any of the food he has brought, he insists that she drink wine, which he claims is a sacrament. When she declines, he threatens to withhold sleep, water, and food from her. With no alternatives, Elizabeth reluctantly drinks 2 cups of wine, after which the man finally offers her some food. On the 24th day of her captivity, Wanda and Brian argue about the insufficient water supply at their camp and the resulting dehydration they all face. That evening, Elizabeth awakens to find a full cup of water beside her. Uncertain of its origin, she recalls that there had been no water left in the camp. Regardless of where it came from, she feels grateful for its timely appearance and considers it a miracle. A week later, on the 4th of July, Brian returns from town, excitedly informing his wives that they will be able to watch the fireworks that night. He releases the teen from her chains, and the 3 of them make their way to the edge of the forest, where they sit together, marveling at the stunning displays in the sky. The following day, Brian overhears Elizabeth softly mentioning her cousin Olivia's name, prompting him to ask for more details. Elizabeth explains that Olivia is her age and her closest friend. After some contemplation, Brian declares that he has received new instructions from the Lord, who has commanded him to take Olivia as his 3rd wife. In a state of panic, Elizabeth pleads with him not to proceed. Initially, she feels guilty for even bringing up her cousin, but she can't help but think that having Olivia around might not be so bad, as it would alleviate her loneliness. Brian removes his robe and prepares to return to the house to take Olivia against her will. While he is away, Elizabeth can do little but pray for his plan to fail. The next morning, Brian comes back empty-handed, much to Elizabeth's relief. It seems that while attempting to sneak through the window, he caused a noise that alerted the others in the house. Due to his unsuccessful attempt, both Brian and Wanda come to accept that Olivia becoming the 3rd wife was not meant to happen. That night, as the couple indulges in alcohol, the captive claims she needs to use the restroom. She cautiously retreats from the campsite, hoping for a chance to escape. However, when she turns around, the deranged man is right behind her. He lifts her off the ground, throws her over his shoulder, and carries the weeping teen back to the tent. The next day, Wanda voices her frustrations about having to remain at the camp to care for Elizabeth while her husband goes into town. Upon his return, she expresses her discontent and decides to leave the camp. After Wanda departs, Brian expresses a desire to be intimate with Elizabeth. To deter him, she reminds him of the divine rule he must adhere to, which permits him to be with Wanda only during daylight hours. Fortunately, Brian respects this guideline, much to Elizabeth's relief. Later, Wanda comes back and insists that she will accompany her husband on his next trip to town. Relenting to his wife's wishes, Brian removes Elizabeth's chains and provides both her and Wanda with veils and masks to conceal their identities. As they descend the mountain, they encounter a jogger. The young girl considers calling for help but refrains due to her fear of potential repercussions from her captors. In the city, amidst a crowd, Brian keeps Elizabeth close and threatens her, warning that he will harm her family if she attempts to flee. Subsequently, they meet a grocery clerk who is revealed to be one of Brian's acquaintances or followers, confirming Elizabeth's fears that he indeed has the means to endanger her family. The clerk informs Brian about a party scheduled for that evening. At the party, where attendees indulge in alcohol and illicit drugs, Brian becomes furious when the clerk approaches Elizabeth, whom he claims is his daughter. Wanda is appalled by the scene unfolding around her and demands that they return to the camp. As winter draws near, the trio visits the Salt Lake City Public Library to explore potential relocation options. Their unconventional attire attracts the attention of some passers-by, prompting them to notify the authorities. Soon, a police detective approaches their table, leading Wanda to discreetly squeeze Elizabeth's thigh to keep her composed. The officer requests to see Brian's daughter's face beneath the mask to determine if she is the missing girl they have been searching for. The man asserts that she cannot reveal her face in public due to religious beliefs. The officer maintains that he only needs to see her face once, prompting Brian to argue that if his daughter were the missing girl featured in the news, she would not remain silent. In reality, Elizabeth yearned to speak out, but the fear for her own life and her family's safety kept her from doing so. On the 102nd day, in the San Diego foothills where Brian has decided to spend the winter, Wanda and Elizabeth gather fruit from the cacti surrounding their campsite. Later, the prisoner observes the couple frequently arguing about the man's failure to provide food and water for his wives. He has completely ignored the divine command that permits him to be with Wanda only during the day, insisting instead on being with Elizabeth. 50 days later, a man nearly stumbles into their camp. To protect him, the teenager opts to remain quiet, aware that if she screams, Brian would likely kill her and possibly the man as well. Believing they are too close to civilization, the deranged man instructs his wives to pack up and relocate. 32 days later, in the San Diego mountains, Wanda's growing frustration with her husband's deviation from the Lord's teachings, along with her own inadequacies as a provider, drives her to threaten to take her life. The man wrests the knife from her grasp, and she walks away from the camp. Eventually, she returns and declares her desire to no longer follow her husband. Irritated, Brian grabs his bag and announces he is going to town, leaving his wives behind with only 2 days' worth of food and water. Wanda and Elizabeth are left starving and parched. After 4 days, the two have become weak and lack the strength to seek food or water. The following day, as Elizabeth awaits her fate, she reflects on her loved ones and feels grateful for having such a caring family. That night, rain begins to fall in the California desert, bringing relief to the two women. Eventually, Brian returns with food and explains that he was delayed in coming back due to being arrested for breaking into a church. Months later, as the man announces the conclusion of their time in California, Elizabeth expresses a strong conviction that the Lord is guiding them to return to Utah. Having listened to the couple discuss their fabricated beliefs for months, she skillfully articulates her thoughts in a manner that they will find agreeable. She requests that Brian pray to God to determine if relocating to Utah is the right choice, and he assures her that he will. Shortly thereafter, the trio hitchhikes to Utah, disguising the teenager with a wig to hide her identity. In Sandy, Utah, Brian scolds Elizabeth for conversing with the man who provided them a ride. That night, her captor expels her for the final time. The following day at the supermarket, the teenager notices a bulletin board filled with missing persons posters. Brian observes her and remarks that her picture is absent because no one cares about her anymore, asserting that she belongs to him forever. As they leave the store, several police officers approach the group and inquire if the teenager is Elizabeth Smart. She confirms her identity, feeling a sense of relief at being freed from her captors. At the police station, the missing teenager is finally reunited with her father, Ed, and her mother, Lois. Soon after, they take her home, where she shares a heartfelt embrace with all her siblings. Later, as she explores her room, Lois enters and suggests that the entire family should sleep together in her room. However, the teenager expresses her desire to sleep in her own bed that night, assuring her mother that she will still be present the following day. Brian Mitchell received 2 life sentences for his crimes, while Wanda Barzee was sentenced to 15 years. Elizabeth Smart eventually married, had 2 children, and continues to advocate for the prevention of predatory behavior.